Wake up, Don Callahan. This is a special edition of the Noon Dish at 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, January 27th. I'm Tommy Ashley. That, of course, is the man of the moment, Mr. Don Callahan, putting in extra work tonight. Roughly 7:35, 2025 quarterback, four-star composite, Bryce Baker out of East Forsyth High School in Kernersville, North Carolina, commits to the Tar Heels. Don, seems like a pretty big deal. We've talked about the 2024 class over and over and over again. We'll talk about it tomorrow on our regularly scheduled show. But North Carolina starts out their 2025 class with a bang with Bryce Baker.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said. I mean, just to start the class with a quarterback, a four-star guy, an in-state guy, and to start it this soon, get him committed this soon is pretty significant. You look at what UNC kind of had to deal with last class and trying to find a quarterback. They started off well. A lot of this had to do with the change at offensive coordinator / quarterback coach, but had a group of quarterbacks you were recruiting. Then that changed when once Chip Lindsay came in, kind of waited it out with those guys, played with those guys. There was a lot of visits and everything like that, and ultimately kind of got left without a quarterback. Had to go back to the drawing board during the spring evaluation period. Finally found one that they're really happy with. But the one thing that Michael Merdinger, who ended up committing to North Carolina and being the quarterback for the 2024 class, mentioned to me was he's like, "Hey, I wish I could have committed a lot sooner to North Carolina because I would have loved to have been a bigger impact on this class and helping recruit for it." Bryce Baker is going to have that opportunity from the jump. And we have a Q&A up on the site with him. And he mentions, I'm talking about Bryce Baker, mentions that's something that he definitely is going to be a part of, all about, is recruiting for the 2025 class for North Carolina.
It's interesting, everybody fretted, and maybe rightfully so, with Phil Longo leaving. He sort of took some prospects and commits that way with him. With Drake Mays, assuming it's Drake Mays' last season in North Carolina, it virtually has to be if it goes as expected. But you mentioned Merdinger, now you have Baker. Just sort of speak to what the skill set of Bryce Baker. Now, he's a rising junior in high school. So he's got a lot of room for growth, but he's also already 6'3", 185 pounds-ish. So the frame to carry more, I'm sure. What is his skill set now? How do you see him sort of evolving and getting better over the next couple of years?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned and I kind of reminded everybody that this is a kid who has yet to play his junior season of high school football. He has 2 years of high school football left. So clearly he has a lot of growing that he can do in those 2 years. But, I'll tell you, when I went by his high school, which was at the time Walkertown High School, he has since transferred to East Forsyth, which is an in-state football powerhouse. Obviously moved there because he wanted a better opportunity to kind of compete for a state championship. But anyway, I was actually kind of, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I'll go with surprise for lack of a better word when I saw him in person, because he's listed, what you said, listed 6'3", 185 pounds. And a lot of times, we have this saying, you knock 2 inches, you knock 10 pounds off, and that's typically what you end up seeing. But when I went by his school and saw him in person, he's at least 6'2", and it probably is 6'3", and a very impressive looking. And then at camp at North Carolina earlier this month, he's filling out really well. You could tell he spends a ton of time in the weight room, a really good physique for his age. But even with his lack of experience, he's only played one full season of varsity football. Let's say 1.5, because he played about half of his freshman year. And, that was kind of on a rough team. I think they only won a couple of games that year. But even with all of that, I mean, the tools are definitely there. Throws, I mentioned this earlier to you, throws darts. And the thing, too, that I want to throw in there, and this kind of speaks, I think, to just his ceiling, is that both his former and his current high school coaches mentioned just how smart of a player he is and how he's a guy who definitely takes a lot of time to work on his craft in the classroom, meaning you're studying film and that sort of thing. And that's obviously, 2 more years of learning the game and learning offenses and that sort of thing is only going to help him before he arrives in North Carolina.
Yeah, it's interesting. 2023 has just graduated. So, again, we're talking about a guy
Yeah.
that's roughly 2 years out of being at North Carolina. But if you're 6'3", 185 or so already, as I guess a 15, 16-year-old, you're certainly going to fill out and get a lot bigger and better. Don, you mentioned you sort of mentioned his personality, and you and I have talked about him before we got on here. Uh, his personality is one of a type of a guy you want to be the lead of your
Yeah.
recruiting class. Just sort of speak to that. You talk to him. There's an in-depth Q&A on the message boards or on Inside Carolina. And folks, if you happen to be watching this and you're not a member of the premium board, this is the time to get in. It's all over it. But Don, just sort of talk
Yeah,
to us
and not
about
just
that.
for not just for this. I mean, we have a bunch of UNC targets, and we won't talk about 2024. We'll talk about that tomorrow during the normal noon dish. But we have a bunch of announcements coming up, and a bunch of scoop was posted today about those coming up. So definitely, you need to get subscribing. But to answer your question, just look at the Q&A. I mean, his questions. It's not the generic UNC was the best combination of athletics and academics. His answers were clearly thought out. He laid out just an interaction with Drake May. I'm not going to go into details because I want people to read it, but an interaction with Drake May that really kind of hit home. Is very, very specific. He was specific on what he was looking for and kind of laid that out and really thorough on just, what's going on with recruiting and how that kind of impacted him. Another kind of example is, and I just saw it as soon as I was hopping on here, in addition to the typical commitment edit / graphic that kids tweet out, he posted, I guess, kind of like, him talking, explaining just kind of what's going on with him and all that sort of stuff. But, he's definitely he's like a guy who, I don't know what most of his situation at high school is, although I know he's a very good student, but it wouldn't surprise me to find out he's like a class president sort of thing, because he just has that sort of, aura about him, and he speaks so well and is so thought out, and it's not generic stuff. It's like legitimate thoughts and that sort of thing, which obviously is only going to help him in his career.
Yeah, just looking at it and reading the Q&A, definitely seems wise beyond his years. We'll see how he continues to grow and all. Let's go to the chat, and we're talking with Don Callahan here on a special edition of Noon Dish
We
2025.
got 69 people in there.
I know, on a Tuesday night on a pop-up. It's just like we walked up, we rolled out of the car, set up the mic stand, set up the speakers, and people showed up. It's because of you, man. Look, you even wore a jacket
I
for
know
the
we got,
occasion.
this is spur of the moment thing, so we gotta get spicy with it.
Yeah, I go full Outcast, you go full sport coat. So yeah, two different places, lots in life going on here. But Don, let's take some questions from the chat, and I'm gonna go to Preston from Greensboro, and of course, shout out to everybody that's in here. A lot of regulars, a couple new names, so we appreciate everybody joining. Preston from Greensboro. Now, this is a doozy of a question, and that's why I'm gonna start with it. How does he compare to Drake May as a
Yeah, I
junior?
mean,
Let's be fair a little bit,
yeah,
Don.
I mean, I don't think it's fair to compare anyone to Drake May. Those who were Inside Carolina subscribers back when he was going through his process. I mean, Drake was a kid who I went to Myers Park High School shortly after he transferred from Huff, which I guess there is one good comparison. They both started out somewhere and transferred to another school although for Drake, I mean, Huff is kind of a Charlotte. Well, Huff is a powerhouse, and the same thing at that time with Myers Park. But yeah, I mean, and from the jump, I mean, Drake, he was just on a different level, and so it's not fair to compare anyone to Drake, to be completely honest. But there definitely are some comparisons. The one other thing is Bryce actually had some basketball scholarships, and I believe Drake also did. Nothing big. I don't. I should have probably asked him. I don't believe he intends on playing two sports in college, but it just kind of speaks to the level of athleticism that he has. Same thing with Drake, who was a great basketball player at Myers Park High School. But beyond that, I mean, it's just Drake. He was trained by his dad from a very young age to specifically play the quarterback position, and had older brothers who are big time athletes, big time recruits in different sports. So it's tough to compare those two.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing about it is Carolina had, and Mac Brown specifically, when he came back, he had Sam Howell, he had Drake May. So he basically struck it rich right out of the gate. I mean, you could not. I would wager that there's not a coach in the country that wouldn't take those two guys as their first two quarterbacks in their stint at a university. And now you have the recruiting process with Chip Lindsay in there. And so, Don, let's sort of talk about that a little bit. A couple people in the chat, John Sink says, "What happens with Tad Hudson now?" I'll just chime in with my 2 cents. You recruit a quarterback every class,
Yeah.
and you have to.
Mm-hmm.
And the portal is a real thing, and all that good stuff. But let's talk about that. This is a guy. Baker is a guy that, like I mentioned, is 2 years away. Unless
Mm-hmm.
he reclasses to 24, we're not even going there. But he's 2 years away. So quarterback recruiting is set and commitments are set. But what happens to the guys underneath him, or a year ahead of him, should I say, as they get ready? Tad Hudson, already a part of the North Carolina program. Merdinger will be before Baker gets here. What do you see, and how do you see that shaking out? I think it's good to have
So
as
I
many
think
birds in the hand.
this is kind of what we deal with. It's like as soon as we move to the next class, the prior class is completely forgotten, and it's crazy because the fans are all going nuts over that class when that was happening, but now it's completely forgotten and we're on to the next class. And so I think Tad Hudson has tremendous talent. I mean, he has some of the best arm talent, pure arm talent you'll find, on a quarterback. Just effortlessly strong arm. A kid who, he played on the Carolina Stars. He played at Huff High School. We mentioned them. A Charlotte powerhouse that he took them deep into the playoffs multiple times. Played a very tough schedule. So he has a lot of talent. And really, and then I like your kind of comment also. I mean, if Drake May leaves like everyone expects after this season, the competition is going to be there among, Tad's going to be in that competition along with Connor Harrell and Merdinger and all that. What your thoughts on just what things look like with that?
Well, my thing is the best guys play,
Mm-hmm.
and the bottom line is, and this is what's different, and it may not be different. It may just be because we cover them and talk to them all the time, so it may go on at other places. Guys are going to play if they can play. If they're good
Yeah.
enough to play, they will play.
Yeah.
Mac Brown is not going to sit around, and Taylor Vippolis said this on the thing we did with the offense. Mac Brown's not going to stash somebody that's really good that could help them win now. It just
Yeah.
doesn't work that way. And the cool thing about it is that the portal is available. And I'm not saying portal for anybody. I'm just, talking in general. If you want to play and you're in a situation where you're not going to play, whether your name is Tommy Ashley or Don Callahan or, Michael Jordan, you can go somewhere else. And
Yeah.
Mac's shown um, that he is willing and able to help people find landing spots. So the thing is that it'll all shake out. I'm
Yeah.
interested. Here's what I want to see, Don, and you've seen a lot of tape on these guys, and we'll talk about Baker specifically, but I want to see these guys play in person.
Mm-hmm.
Merdinger will be tough since he's down in Florida, though they are playing Cardinal Gibbons up here at some point, or at least playing them. I want to see him in tape. So how does Baker look? People are asking for comparisons for Baker already. Do you have one? Have you seen him recruit and sort of been able to compare him? Say, oh, he looks like such and such. Somebody mentioned C.J. Stroud. I mean, C.J. Stroud
Yeah.
was one of the best college quarterbacks in of a
Yeah.
long time. So
You know, I need to see more. I mean, the talent is definitely there. The size is there. The arm is there for me to like it, but I need to see more. I need to see it in person, to be honest. I'm a big in-person guy, especially with the quarterback position. There's a lot. I mean, you throw on any quarterback highlights, and you're gonna see a bunch of fly routes and the quarterback just kind of throwing it. and landing in the receiver's hands, receiver scoring a touchdown. I mean, you're going to see like 10 of those. You need to see it in person. You need to see some of the warm up stuff. You need to see how they interact, all that sort of stuff. I struggle with a comparison at this point, and yeah, CJ Stroud. That's a tough one to make this early.
And then somebody asked, how is the mobility? How is Baker's mobility? That is something you can tell. You can also tell the athleticism simply if you go just along on the basketball side of things alone. So I think North Carolina is getting a guy here who, again, has a ton of room to grow and grow up and mature, but has the foundation to be really good and is already considered to be really good. Don, anything else on Baker specifically? Because I do have a couple follow-up questions related to
that. No.
Nothing specific. Okay.
I don't know. We covered a lot. I don't know.
It's amazing
I'm willing to go in a different direction.
I don't want to go in a different direction because I want folks to pay attention to us at noon tomorrow as we talk more about the 2024s. But I'll give. Here's what I've learned this weekend, and for folks that don't know, I went to Showtime camp with Don Callahan, and a couple things I learned there. One, Don is a celebrity.
Oh no.
Two, young guys and young recruits are really concerned about where stuff's going to show up on social media. I mean, they're like, "What's your social?" I haven't had anybody ask me what my social media is, or my Twitter, or my IG, or my Snap in a long, long time, and they're all interesting. But what I learned watching the players, and it was 25s and 26s there, and Don, and I mentioned this to you, is I watched the quarterbacks. And there were some decent quarterbacks there. Baker was not one of them. But you're right. If you're good, you can play. But in that setting, I think it puts a lot of pressure on young men to perform really well. How much camp time in that type setting matters to coaches in their recruiting versus film, versus seeing them in games, their actual team games?
Film is most important, but there are certain things you cannot see on film, particularly velocity. And then also in a camp setting, you can have them throw specific routes to kind of see, because obviously, depending on the system, the offensive system, there's certain routes that are used more frequently than other routes, depending on the system. And so you can kind of put that quarterback through those routes to see how he responds. You can do a lot of other things. One of the things that I know Chip Lindsay actually does also, and this is not in a specific camp setting, but while a kid is on campus, he likes to bring them into his office and quote unquote put them on the board and have them draw up some different things and get into their minds and that sort of stuff. So obviously, I don't know the one thing you didn't know if you noticed or not, but when you go to these camps, even though there's only one quarterback on the field at all times in a football game, it usually is one of the larger groups, if not the largest group of every single camp. I mean, there was a lot of quarterbacks there. Way more there were a lot of receivers, though. The receivers was the largest group at the Showtime camp. But it's very, very common to go there and have 3 times more quarterbacks than you have offensive linemen, even though 5 offensive linemen play in a football game. But anyway, so Chip Lindsay's not bringing all 20 quarterbacks up to his room and having them, right on the chalkboard. But, when Baker went by, because he actually camped earlier in the month, they definitely went up to Lindsay's room and did some chalk talk and going over some things. And then you can get a little bit into the inside of stuff. It's very accumulative. I mean, film is the most important part, but the quarterback, as we know, is the most important position. So you have to kind of really do your due diligence and you have to look at a lot of other things. And it's not just, if he understands things, it's not just his velocity, it's not just his film, it's also, do you mesh? That's important too. What type of worker is he? Phil Longo stressed he wanted guys like Sam Howell, who would go into the film room on his own and spend a lot of time in the film room. Those sort of things you can kind of pick up by just spending time with a kid, talking to his coaches, that sort of stuff. So it's like an all-encompassing sort of thing that you have to do when you evaluate these quarterbacks.
So we're what? Well, I mean, he hadn't had a season yet, but we're 8 months or 6 months, 7 months into the Chip Lindsay era at North Carolina. What have you picked up as far as specifically quarterback recruiting, watching Chip Lindsay? That's maybe different from Longo.
So I don't know if it's necessarily different, but the one thing, and this is in the Q&A, and I'll give it away a little bit, Q&A with Bryce Baker, is Baker mentioned, I asked him about his relationship with Coach Lindsay and how that impacted his decision. And he said, when I asked Coach Lindsay, we were just kind of talking. He didn't really emphasize so much his resume and who he's put into the NFL and who, all the knowledge that he has and that sort of thing. He really talked about how important it was. Oh, that's right. The question that Baker said that he posed to Lindsay was, what separates you from other quarterback coaches? And Lindsay didn't talk about the resume and all that. He talked about the fact that he has good relationships with his quarterbacks, and that kind of resonated with Bryce. And so you can tell, if we go back to the 2024 class, even though UNC didn't get those targets that he initially targeted, and some of that was just the fact that UNC was kind of sort of late to the game. If you're looking at Bryce Baker committing, in June, to get involved with a kid in January, is pretty tough. But despite all that, the first, his two main targets were Merlinker and now I'm forgetting the kid committed to Arkansas. But anyway, he was able to get those two kids to make North Carolina their first visit after the holiday dead period, which kind of speaks to just their relationship with Chip Lindsay, because North Carolina wasn't recruiting them before, and so that's pretty significant. So I think it just kind of talks about just how he's able to resonate with these recruits, and obviously it made an impact with Bryce Baker to get him to commit so quickly.
Yeah, Jackson's the other kid that went to Arkansas, I believe.
You said KC,
KJ Jackson or something. Anyway,
KJ Jackson. That's right. It is KJ Jackson.
I try to get names right. I'm not great all the time. Shout out to Slagle for posting half right name down there. Last question for you, Don, before we get out of here, because like I said, we've got a big show tomorrow. Just a ton of stuff to talk about. But keeping it on the quarterbacks, Drake May.
Mm-hmm.
It is nice to have an elite quarterback on your roster that does it day in and day out on the field. How big of an impact is it to have a guy like Drake May and even Sam Howell not only performing and showing what a quarterback can do at North Carolina, but being a part of the recruiting process, talking to people? You don't have to give away, because the Q&A is fabulous.
Yeah, he touches on that, so I won't give away that part of it. But it's Drake May is a national name, and that's only going to help. Real quick, Tommy, who's NC State's quarterback?
The lefty from Virginia, Armstrong, I suppose.
Okay. All right.
I follow this stuff, man. I know a little
bit. That's true. But Drake May, as weird as it sounds, my daughter's friends are like, "Oh my God, Drake May? Do you have his phone number?" And so, and these are girls who, I don't know, I imagine they don't watch a whole lot of college football, but Drake May is a name, is a national name, and that is only going to help. Now, a kid's not going to choose North Carolina because Drake May went there, but it definitely helps. And then when you say, okay, Drake May went here, well, guess what? That guy who's quarterbacking for the Washington Commanders. I have a hard time with that.
It's Commanders, man. Move on.
I can't. Anyway, he also went to North Carolina and was here underneath Coach Brown. So it definitely helps with recruits, quarterback recruiting. But like I said, it's not like you're going to pull in all these kids because of it, but it definitely helps.
Yeah, and it helps to have a good one. Bryce Baker, 2025, first member of that class. Don and I will be back tomorrow noon in our regularly scheduled spot on Wednesdays. We were on Thursdays a couple times, and then I was on
We have over
vacation.
113.
I know it's fascinating how folks come to check you out.
So
Um,
we'll have to do some of these. We won't do them for every single commit, but for the bigger ones, we definitely need to do these more often, I think.
yeah, I tell you, I will say this: Inside Carolina fans and message board folks are awesome because they will drop everything to pop on and join Inside Carolina Live. We've had thousands on these before, and here we are talking
You wanna
about a
tell
2025
what the
recruit.
20 top 5 for tomorrow is?
Top 5 for tomorrow is we need help
Fast
trying to
food.
figure that out. Fast
Here's
food joints.
that's
Yes.
fast food. Has to we're gonna have to have rules. Has to have a usually have a drive-through.
What does usually mean? It has to
Like,
have a
it can't
drive-through.
well, like, some Subways have drive-throughs. I don't think that's fast food. I get it. It needs to regularly have a drive-through.
Okay. Well, we'll figure it out. Top 5 fast food joints. Join us for that. Join us for a ton of information on 2024. Don is look, I'm looking at the Tar Pit Premium message boards right now, folks. Breaking Bryce Baker news. This show. Key questions that Taylor Vippolis and I did. Weekly scoop, Don's mock 2.0 class. Commitment Q&A, all the scoop and all the dish and all the chisme on Bryce Baker. And then, of course, always the Ask the Recruiting Expert, Don. And then you flip over to the basketball side, and it's the same way. So folks need to get involved on the Inside Carolina Premium boards, get involved on the message boards. Fun place to be. There is no off season, for sure, for sure, for sure. That's Donna Callahan. That's Don Callahan. I almost called you Donna. I think it's because you
Whoa,
put
I
hair
thought you
gel.
said what's that?
I thought it was because you put hair gel in your hair before we started, so I said Donna. My bad. That's Don Callahan. I'm Tommy Ashley. No hair gel needed.
Yeah.
This has been the Noon Dish at night. We'll be back tomorrow at noon. Check out Johnny T-shirt, johnnytshirt.com. As always, folks, rate us, review us, subscribe, all the good things, all the good stuffs, and we'll be back to see you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.